A few weeks ago, life in our quiet suburban neighborhood started to take a strange turn. Reports of break-ins began to surface. At first, it was the Thompsons next door. Someone had rifled through their garden shed, but nothing was stolen. Then it was the Harrisons 3 houses down, whose unlocked car had been emptied of loose change. The neighborhood buzzed with whispers of an amateur thief lurking around. Being a cautious person, I decided to step up our home's security. I didn't want my wife, Emily, or our 2 kids to feel unsafe. Installing security cameras seemed like the natural choice. I ordered a basic setup online, spent a Saturday figuring out the instructions, and mounted the cameras on our front porch, backyard, and inside the garage. I wasn't expecting anything major. In fact, I even joked to Emily, "If this catches our dog knocking over the trash cans, it'll already be worth it." She laughed, though it sounded a bit forced. "It's a good idea," she said, brushing off her hands after preparing breakfast. "You can never be too careful." At the time, her unease struck me as concern about the burglaries, but now I wonder if there was something more to it. A week passed without incident. I'd check the footage every now and then, mostly out of curiosity. It was mundane: delivery drivers, kids biking by, squirrels darting across the driveway. I almost forgot about the cameras entirely. Then one night, around 2 a.m., the system sent me an alert. A motion sensor had been triggered in the backyard. I scrambled out of bed, trying not to wake Emily. The live feed on my phone showed nothing. Just the soft sway of the trees and our garden lights casting shadows. I chalked it up to a false alarm and went back to bed, but something about it gnawed at me. The next morning, I mentioned it to Emily over breakfast. Her response was odd, overly casual. "It's probably just the wind," she said, barely looking up from her coffee. That day at work, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. When I got home, I decided to review the footage from the night before, just in case. Most of it was uneventful, but then I caught a brief movement near the edge of the yard. It was just a shadow, darting quickly out of frame, but it was enough to send a chill up my spine. "Emily," I called out, motioning her over to the screen. "Look at this." She leaned over my shoulder, her hair brushing against my face as she peered at the footage. "It's probably a stray cat," she said quickly, retreating to the kitchen before I could press her further. That night, I adjusted the camera angles and set them to record continuously. 3 nights later, another alert came in. This time, the motion was near the garage. I was wide awake, having stayed up late to finish some work, so I grabbed my phone instantly. The footage loaded, and my stomach flipped. Someone, a man, hooded and dressed in dark clothes, was walking up the side of the house. He stopped near the garage door, looking around before slipping out of view. I sprang out of my chair, heart racing. Emily came rushing out of the bedroom, alarmed by the noise. "What's going on?" she asked. "Someone's outside," I whispered urgently, already dialing 911. Her reaction wasn't what I expected. She froze, her eyes wide, and for a fleeting moment I thought I saw fear, not of the intruder, but of something else. "You don't need to call the police," she said a little too quickly. "It's probably just a mistake." "A mistake?" At that moment, I didn't have time to process her strange response. The police arrived within minutes, but the intruder was gone, leaving no trace behind. As the officers questioned us, I caught Emily pacing near the living room window. Her arms were crossed tightly, and she avoided eye contact. When they left, I asked her about it. "You seem tense," I said carefully. "I just hate the idea of strangers lurking around," she replied, her voice soft but firm. "It's unsettling." I wanted to believe her. I really did. That week, I doubled down on security, adding more cameras and better lighting around the house. Emily seemed supportive but distant, as if her mind was elsewhere. I chalked it up to stress from the burglaries. It wasn't until I reviewed the new footage days later that I noticed something strange, a pattern. The motion sensors would go off at the same times, but always in the early hours when I was asleep. And the same figure, would appear near the garage and vanish before coming into view of the other cameras. It was as if they knew exactly where to go to avoid detection. I told myself it was a coincidence. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that Emily's unease wasn't just about the burglaries. There was something she wasn't telling me. And I was determined to find out. After the incident near the garage, life returned to a tentative normal. Emily seemed to relax, but only on the surface. I could see it in her eyes, an unease she tried to mask with overly cheery smiles and unnecessary tidying up. The house was spotless, even by her already meticulous standards. I told myself it was her way of coping, but the tension in her shoulders said otherwise. Meanwhile, I dove into the security footage. Every night after the kids were in bed and Emily retreated to the bedroom with her tablet, I pored over hours of recordings. The same figure, the same route, the same strange precision. Whoever it was, they knew how to avoid full capture. A professional thief? A prankster? Or something else? One evening, I decided to adjust the cameras again, this time installing one higher up on the garage roof. It was a pain to get to, and I had to dig out an old ladder from the shed. As I worked, Emily came outside, holding a cup of tea. "You're really taking this seriously," she said, her voice light but with a nervous edge. I glanced down at her. "We've got someone sneaking around. You don't think that's serious?" She hesitated, looking down at her mug. "Of course it's serious. I just don't want you to lose sleep over it. The police didn't find anything, remember?" That comment stuck with me. I hadn't mentioned my late-night footage review sessions to her. How did she know I wasn't sleeping well? The next day, something odd happened. Emily told me she was running errands and left around noon. It wasn't unusual. She often went grocery shopping or met up with friends for coffee. But this time, she didn't come back until late afternoon, and she didn't bring back groceries. When I asked her how her day went, she smiled but offered a vague reply about catching up with an old friend. "Which friend?" I asked casually, testing the waters. Her smile faltered for just a second, so quick I might have missed it if I wasn't already suspicious. "Oh, just Karen from the book club." Karen had moved to Florida 6 months ago. I didn't call her out on it, but a tiny seed of doubt took root. Later that week, while reviewing the footage again, I spotted something that made my stomach twist. Around the time Emily was supposed to be out running errands, the figure appeared again. This time, they were bold enough to come closer to the house, pausing near the back door before vanishing out of frame. Why would they risk coming during the day? And where had Emily really been? That night, as we lay in bed, I pretended to scroll through my phone while she read her book. Her breathing was calm, but there was a tension in the way she clutched the edges of her blanket. I decided to test something. "Do you think I should show the footage to the neighborhood watch group?" I asked casually, as if it were an afterthought. Emily's head snapped up, her eyes wide. "Why? What would that do? Maybe someone else has seen this person or noticed anything unusual." Her reaction was swift and unexpected. "No. I mean, it's probably nothing. You don't want to embarrass yourself if it's just a kid messing around." Her response was too quick, too defensive. My instincts screamed at me. Something was wrong. The next day, I decided to set a trap. I borrowed a friend's dog, an overly curious golden retriever named Max, for the evening, under the guise of wanting company during my jogs. What I really needed was an excuse to patrol the perimeter of the house without drawing suspicion. As I walked Max along the fence line, I kept my eyes peeled for anything out of the ordinary. Then I saw it, a faint scuff mark on the dirt near the garage door, like someone had slipped climbing over. It was subtle, easy to miss, but fresh. When I returned inside, Emily was in the living room, scrolling through her phone. She glanced up, her expression carefully neutral. "Nice walk?" "Yeah," I replied, watching her reaction closely. Max was curious about something near the garage. "Probably just a squirrel, though." Her fingers stilled on the screen for just a second, then resumed scrolling. "Probably," she said lightly. But there was something in her tone, something forced. That night, as Emily slept beside me, I made a decision. It was time to upgrade my investigation. I ordered 2 new cameras with better resolution and night vision capabilities. If this mystery figure thought they could outsmart my current setup, they were about to face a rude awakening. But as I drifted off to sleep, a darker thought crept in. Was the figure even the real problem? Or was it the person lying next to me? A few nights later, the cameras arrived. The setup took me hours, but it was worth it. I placed one high above the backyard, angled to capture the spots the figure seemed to frequent, and another overlooking the driveway from a tree branch, out of sight and out of reach. These cameras were stealthier and sharper. If someone showed up again, I'd have them in full detail. Emily didn't ask about the new equipment. She didn't even comment on the boxes piled in the corner. It was as if she'd decided to avoid the topic altogether. The first couple of nights were uneventful. I started to think I was overreacting, that maybe the figure was just a random prowler, now scared off by the visible cameras. But on the third night, something changed. Around 1 a.m., my phone buzzed with an alert. Motion detected. I bolted upright, careful not to wake Emily, and grabbed my phone. The new backyard camera had caught something, a shadow darting near the edge of the fence. My heart raced as I swiped to the live feed, but the figure was gone. Determined to catch them, I replayed the footage. There they were, just as before. A hooded figure creeping along the back fence, but this time they paused, crouching near the corner of the yard. My pulse quickened. What were they doing? Then I saw it. The figure pulled out a phone and typed something. Seconds later, my wife's phone, lying on her nightstand, lit up. My breath hitched. I stared at her phone, the screen glowing softly in the dark room. A name I didn't recognize popped up, Chris. Emily stirred but didn't wake. My mind raced. Why would this person, this intruder, be texting my wife in the middle of the night? I needed answers. Carefully, I slipped out of bed and into the hallway. My hands shook as I tapped into our shared phone account, something we'd set up ages ago to manage bills. I navigated to her call logs and text history. What I found left me numb. Chris had been texting her regularly, daily, sometimes hourly. The messages started innocuous enough. How are you? When can I see you? But as I scrolled further back, they grew intimate. Explicit. Last night was amazing. I can't stop thinking about you. When can we meet again? I miss you. One message sent just a few days ago made my stomach churn. Does he suspect anything? I closed my eyes, willing the world to stop spinning. It wasn't just the betrayal, it was the audacity. The lies. The fact that she'd been carrying on this affair under our roof, using our home as the backdrop for her deceit. For a long moment I sat in the dark hallway, trying to steady my breathing. I wanted to storm back into the bedroom and demand answers, to scream, to cry. But something held me back. Catching them red-handed wasn't enough. I needed proof. Proof so damning she couldn't talk her way out of it. The next day, I acted as if nothing had changed. I made breakfast for the kids, kissed Emily on the cheek, and wished her a good day as she left for work. Inside, I was unraveling. During my lunch break, I reviewed the camera footage again. The figure, Chris, I assumed, had come to the house multiple times over the past few weeks. Sometimes during the day when I was at work, sometimes late at night. They always approached the same way, always stayed out of sight of the older cameras. They knew where to go. I decided to call in sick the following day. I needed to see this for myself. Emily left around noon, claiming she had a meeting with her boss. I waited for an hour, then checked the cameras. Sure enough, the figure appeared. Chris. He walked up the driveway like he owned the place, hood down this time, revealing a man in his early 40s with a cocky smirk plastered on his face. He didn't knock on the door. Instead, he headed straight for the garage. I watched in disbelief as Emily's car pulled into the driveway moments later. She got out, smiling brightly as she greeted him. He leaned in and kissed her, my wife, right there in front of our house. My hands clenched into fists as I watched the live feed. They didn't even try to hide it. Emily opened the garage door, and they slipped inside, disappearing from view. For a moment I sat there, trembling with rage. This wasn't just a betrayal. It was brazen, shameless. But I couldn't confront them yet. Not without proof. I grabbed my phone and activated the microphone on the garage camera, recording every sound, every word. "Are you sure he won't find out?" Chris asked, his voice casual. "He's clueless," Emily replied, her tone dripping with confidence. "He thinks it's all about the burglaries." My world collapsed. She'd used my fears against me, twisted them to cover her tracks. I ended the recording and saved it to the cloud. This wasn't over, not yet. But when it was, I vowed they'd regret underestimating me. The next morning, I woke with a strange calmness. The raw anger from the night before had subsided, replaced by cold determination. If Emily and Chris thought they could make a fool out of me, they were in for a surprise. I spent the early hours reviewing the footage and recordings I'd captured, meticulously organizing them into a private folder on my laptop. Every interaction between Emily and Chris was time-stamped and logged. The video of their garage rendezvous was my crown jewel. There was no mistaking their intimacy or the way they mocked me. I wasn't just gathering evidence for my peace of mind. This would be the cornerstone of what came next. By mid-morning, I had a plan. Confrontation wasn't enough. I needed a controlled fallout. Emily had always prided herself on appearances, and Chris's smug demeanor suggested he thought himself untouchable. I wanted to shatter both illusions. Step 1: tighten the net. I reached out to a lawyer, someone discreet and sharp. A friend from college had gone through a messy divorce and swore by her. Within minutes of our call, she was guiding me through the steps to protect myself. "Gather everything: bank records, texts, videos. Get a full picture of her activities. And don't let her know you're on to her," she advised. Step 2: a public reckoning. I couldn't help but remember our upcoming neighborhood block party. Emily had been eagerly helping organize it for weeks. She loved the attention, the compliments on her hosting skills. It was the perfect stage for what I had in mind. I wasn't sure yet how I'd play my hand, but one thing was certain: everyone would know the truth by the end of it. That evening, I started testing the waters. At dinner, as the kids chatted about their day, I glanced at Emily. She was unusually cheerful, perhaps emboldened by her secret. "How's work been?" I asked casually, swirling my fork through my pasta. She didn't miss a beat. "Busy as always," she replied. "We've got a big project coming up." The ease of her lies was staggering. I smiled, pretending to buy it. After dinner, I excused myself to catch up on work. In reality, I used the time to install a small GPS tracker on her car. The device was simple, magnetic, discreet, and synced to my phone. If she was meeting Chris during the day, I wanted to know where. My hands shook as I secured the tracker beneath her rear bumper. The betrayal was no longer abstract. It was tangible, a reality I couldn't ignore. The next morning, Emily left as usual, kissing me on the cheek and telling me she'd be home late because of a meeting. I watched from the window as her car disappeared down the street. Minutes later, my phone buzzed. The tracker app showed her heading toward a part of town I didn't recognize. Not her office, not any of her usual haunts. I followed the signal to a small, tucked-away cafe. Parking a few blocks away, I spotted her car almost immediately. I didn't have to wait long before Chris appeared. They greeted each other with a familiarity that made my stomach churn, her hand on his arm, his lips grazing her temple. They laughed, ordered coffee, and sat in a corner booth, oblivious to the world around them. From my vantage point, I captured photos and videos. The cozy atmosphere of the cafe made their betrayal seem even more intimate, more personal. Back at home, I reviewed everything I'd collected. My anger simmered just below the surface, but I knew better than to act on it impulsively. Timing was everything. That night, Emily acted as if nothing was amiss. She sat beside me on the couch, scrolling through her phone while I pretended to watch TV. "You've been working hard lately," I said, my tone light. She glanced at me, a flicker of guilt crossing her face before she smiled. "You know how it is. The project's demanding." I nodded, biting back the urge to confront her right then and there. Let her believe she still had the upper hand. As the block party approached, I finalized my preparations. I'd compiled a flash drive containing the most damning footage, neatly labeled for easy access. If Emily and Chris wanted to play their games in the shadows, I was about to drag them into the light. By the time the weekend rolled around, I was ready. The calm that had settled over me earlier in the week returned, steady and unshakable. They had no idea what was coming. The day of the block party dawned bright and clear, a cruel irony given the storm I was about to unleash. As neighbors bustled around setting up tables and stringing up lights, I played my role perfectly, the doting husband and friendly neighbor, offering to help wherever I could. Emily was in her element, smiling and chatting as she finalized details with the neighborhood committee. She looked radiant, her sundress catching the light as she moved around the yard. If I didn't know better, I might have been charmed by the sight. But now, all I could see was the betrayal. Every laugh, every cheerful wave, felt like a slap in the face. By noon, the party was in full swing. The smell of barbecue wafted through the air as kids raced each other down the street. Adults mingled with beers and lemonade in hand, talking about everything from lawn care to local gossip. I kept an eye on Emily, who seemed more animated than usual. She was always a social butterfly, but today her energy felt calculated. Forced, almost. Chris wasn't around, at least not yet. As the afternoon stretched on, I mingled, subtly planting seeds with our neighbors. Casual remarks about the new security cameras I'd installed, the mysterious figure caught on footage, and how grateful I was for Emily's support during such a strange time. The reactions were predictable, nods of concern, murmurs of sympathy. They'd have no idea what hit them. By early evening I spotted Chris. He wasn't supposed to be here, at least not as far as I knew. He blended into the crowd well, wearing a button-up shirt and jeans, holding a drink as he laughed with a group of people I didn't recognize. Emily noticed him too. I saw the flicker of recognition in her eyes, the way her smile faltered for half a second before she recovered. She didn't approach him immediately, but I could tell she was hyper-aware of his presence. Good. Let her squirm. As dusk fell, the crowd gathered near the main table for the party's highlight, a slideshow of neighborhood events and accomplishments from the past year. Emily had been instrumental in putting it together, a fact she'd mentioned several times over the past week. I'd offered to handle the technical setup. What she didn't know was that I'd slipped my own presentation into the queue. The first few slides went off without a hitch, photos of kids' birthdays, backyard renovations, and block parties passed. Emily stood near the front, beaming at the screen. Then my slides began. The first image was subtle, a nighttime shot of our backyard, with a shadowy figure lurking near the fence. Gasps rippled through the crowd. "What's this?" someone asked. Emily stiffened, her head snapping toward me. "This," I said, my voice calm but loud enough for everyone to hear, "is the person who's been sneaking onto my property. I installed security cameras after the recent break-ins, and well, let's just say they've captured some interesting footage." The next slide appeared, a blurry but recognizable image of Chris near the garage. The murmur of confusion grew louder. Chris himself froze, his drink halfway to his lips. Emily's face turned pale. "What are you doing?" she hissed, her voice low and strained. I ignored her. "At first I thought we were dealing with a thief," I continued, advancing the slides. "But then I started noticing a pattern. The same person, always at the same times." The next slide was a freeze frame of Emily and Chris in the garage, locked in an embrace. The crowd fell silent. Someone gasped. Another muttered, "Oh my God!" Chris's face turned beet red, and Emily stumbled back, her hand flying to her mouth. "This isn't what it looks like," she blurted out, her voice breaking. "Oh, really?" I said, finally turning to face her. Because it looks like my wife has been sneaking around with someone behind my back, right in my own home. Chris tried to speak, but I cut him off. Save it. I have all the evidence I need. The videos, the texts, the locations, everything. Emily looked at me, her eyes wide with panic. We can talk about this privately, please. Privately? I laughed, a bitter sound. You didn't care about privacy when you brought him into my house. So no, Emily. We're doing this now. I stepped back, letting the weight of the moment sink in. The neighbors whispered among themselves, their expressions ranging from shock to disgust. Chris edged toward the crowd, likely planning an escape. Don't bother sneaking off. I called out to him. You'll be hearing from my lawyer soon enough. The party was over. Not just for Emily and Chris, but for everything we built. As I stood there, watching the woman I thought I knew crumble under the weight of her lies, I realized something. This wasn't just the end of my marriage, it was the beginning of something new. And for the first time in weeks, I felt free. The block party ended in chaos. As neighbors dispersed, the whispered rumors and scandalized glances followed Emily and Chris like storm clouds. Chris slipped away quietly, but not before his car was egged by a group of teenagers emboldened by the drama. Emily, on the other hand, stood frozen in the middle of the yard, pale and trembling as the reality of what had just unfolded sank in. I wasn't done yet. As the crowd thinned, she turned to me, her voice barely a whisper. Can we talk? Please? I crossed my arms, the weight of her betrayal pressing down like a vice. Talk? Now you want to talk? What could you possibly say that would make this better, Emily? Her eyes glistened with tears, and she reached out, but I stepped back. Not here. Not now. I'm done making this easy for you. Back inside the house, the silence was deafening. The kids were at my parents' for the night, a small mercy I'd arranged in advance. Emily trailed behind me, her steps hesitant as if she didn't recognize her own home anymore. I went straight to the kitchen, poured myself a drink, and leaned against the counter. So, I said, swirling the whiskey in my glass. How long has this been going on? She flinched, her composure unraveling. It wasn't supposed to happen, Jack. It got out of hand. I laughed bitterly. Out of hand? That's what you call sneaking him into our house? Laughing about me behind my back? Lying to me and the kids? Her tears spilled over, but I felt no pity. It started a few months ago, she admitted, her voice cracking. We met at the gym. At first, it was innocent, just small talk workouts. But then, she trailed off, unable to finish. But then you decided your marriage and family weren't enough? I snapped. That's rich, Emily. She broke down, sobbing into her hands. I didn't mean to hurt you, Jack. I felt trapped. I thought you'd stopped caring. I slammed the glass down on the counter, the sharp sound making her jump. Stopped caring? Do you have any idea how much I've done for this family? For you? The late nights, the sacrifices, all so we could have this life, and you throw it away for him? Her tears didn't soften me. If anything, they fueled my anger. I trusted you, I said, my voice quieter now but no less firm. And you made a fool out of me. Worse, you made a fool out of yourself. When she finally spoke, her voice was hoarse. What happens now? I stared at her, the woman I'd built a life with, and felt nothing but cold detachment. Now we're done. I've already spoken to a lawyer. You'll be hearing from her soon. The color drained from her face. Jack, please, the kids will be fine. I interrupted. Better off, honestly. At least I'll be able to show them what integrity looks like. That night, Emily slept in the guest room, if she slept at all. I spent the hours combing through more of the evidence I'd gathered, building a case not just for divorce but for custody. I didn't want to rip the kids away from her, but I'd be damned if I let her selfishness disrupt their lives more than it already had. The next morning, Emily tried to talk again, but I shut her down. Save it for the lawyers. I said, grabbing my keys. I'll be back later. Don't touch my things. I drove aimlessly for a while, my thoughts racing. Anger, grief, and a strange sense of relief churned inside me. The truth was out now, and there was no going back. As much as it hurt, there was freedom in knowing the lies were over. By the time I returned home, Emily was gone. A hastily scribbled note on the counter said she'd gone to stay with her sister. To give us space. Good. I needed space. Space to think, to rebuild, to figure out what the hell came next. For the first time in weeks, the house was quiet. And for the first time in years, I felt like it was mine again. But this wasn't the end. Not by a long shot. The silence in the house was both a comfort and a reminder. Emily was gone, at least for now, and while I welcomed the absence of her excuses and lies, the void left behind felt surreal. I found myself standing in the kitchen, staring at the fridge where our family calendar hung. Her neatly written notes, soccer practice, PTA meetings, weekend getaways, mocked me. Each entry was a snapshot of a life I thought was real. But there was no time to dwell. The kids would be home from my parents soon, and I needed to figure out how to explain this mess without turning their world upside down. I called my lawyer, Jennifer, first thing. She was sharp, efficient, and to the point. Jack, she began. We have a strong case, but we need to be strategic. This isn't just about proving her infidelity, it's about showing how her actions disrupted the stability of your household. I want custody, I said firmly. We can work toward that, but it won't be easy. Courts rarely remove kids from a mother unless there's clear evidence of neglect or harm. She brought her affair into our home, I countered. She lied to me and them. That's harm enough. Jennifer paused. It's a start, but we'll need more. Start documenting everything. And Jack, stay calm. No matter how angry you are, don't let it cloud your judgment. The kids arrived that afternoon, bounding into the house with the kind of energy only children can muster. My son Ryan dropped his backpack by the door and went straight for the snack drawer. My daughter Lily twirled around the living room, showing off a new headband my mom had bought her. For a moment, everything felt normal. Where's Mom? Ryan asked, his voice muffled through a mouthful of crackers. She's staying with Aunt Karen for a little while, I said, keeping my tone light. Why? Lily asked, her big eyes narrowing in confusion. I knelt down to her level. Sometimes grown-ups need space to figure things out. But it doesn't change how much we both love you, okay? She nodded slowly, but I could see the questions forming in her mind. Over the next few days, I threw myself into a routine. I woke up early, packed their lunches, dropped them at school, and went to work. Evenings were a blur of homework, dinner, and bedtime stories. I leaned on my parents and a few close friends for support, but I kept the deeper details of the situation to myself. Emily called once, asking to speak to the kids. I let them talk, but I kept the call on speaker. When she asked to meet, I told her we'd discuss it through our lawyers. A week later, I received a package from Jennifer. Inside were documents to file for divorce and a request for temporary custody. Included was a draft letter summarizing the evidence we'd gathered, Emily's affair, the texts, the videos. Reading it was like reliving the betrayal all over again, but it was necessary. I signed the papers and sent them back the same day. Then came the hard part, preparing for the inevitable confrontation with Emily. I knew she wouldn't go quietly. Despite her guilt, she'd fight to preserve her image, to keep some semblance of control. But I was ready for her excuses, her tears, her promises to make things right. I wasn't interested in right. I was interested in the truth. One evening, as I tucked Lily into bed, she asked me a question that stopped me cold. Daddy, do you still love Mommy? The innocence in her voice cut through me. For a moment, I didn't know how to respond. I'll always care about your mom, I said carefully. But sometimes, love changes. And it's not your fault, or Ryan's. It's just something grown-ups have to work through. She nodded, seeming satisfied with my answer, but the weight of her question lingered long after she fell asleep. The next day, I received a text from Emily. "We need to talk. For the kids' sake." I stared at the message for a long time before replying. "Fine. Tomorrow at 2. Here." If she thought this was going to be a chance to regain control, she was in for a rude awakening. The groundwork had been laid, and I wasn't backing down. The next step was coming, and I was ready to face it head on. At exactly 2 p.m. the next day, Emily's car pulled into the driveway. I watched from the living room window, my stomach churning with a mix of anger and resolve. She stepped out, looking hesitant, her usual confidence replaced by uncertainty. She'd chosen a modest outfit, likely meant to project humility. A far cry from the woman who brazenly laughed in my face only days ago. I opened the door before she could knock. "Come in," I said curtly, stepping aside. She hesitated, her eyes scanning my face for any sign of forgiveness, before walking inside. We sat at the kitchen table, a place where we'd once shared laughter, meals, and plans for the future. Now, it felt cold, almost clinical. I'd made sure the kids were at my parents' again, knowing this conversation was going to be ugly. Emily fidgeted with her hands, her wedding ring conspicuously absent. "Thank you for agreeing to meet," she began, her voice soft. "Let's skip the pleasantries," I said, leaning back in my chair. "What do you want?" She flinched at my tone but pressed on. "I want to talk about the kids. This situation is affecting them. They deserve to have both parents in their lives." I stared at her, incredulous. "You're worried about the kids now? Where was that concern when you were sneaking Chris into our home?" Her cheeks flushed. "Jack, I made a mistake. A terrible mistake. But that doesn't mean I don't love them, or you." I laughed, the sound bitter and sharp. "Love me? Is that what you call lying, cheating, and treating our marriage like a joke?" Tears welled up in her eyes, but I refused to soften. "You didn't just betray me, Emily. You betrayed this family. And you did it with someone so brazen, so smug, that he didn't even bother hiding it." She reached across the table, but I pulled back. "Jack, please. I know I've hurt you, but I want to fix this. I'm willing to go to therapy, to do whatever it takes to make things right." Her words felt hollow, rehearsed. "Therapy?" I scoffed. "This isn't a rough patch, Emily. This is the end. I've already filed for divorce." Her face crumpled, and she buried it in her hands. "You can't do this," she whispered. "Please, Jack. Think about the kids. They need their mother." "I am thinking about them," I said coldly. "That's why I'm doing this. They deserve better than this toxic mess you've created." She looked up, her tears now replaced with a flicker of anger. "You think you're perfect? You think you haven't made mistakes?" "I'm not perfect," I said evenly. "But I didn't throw away our marriage for a fling. I didn't bring another man into our house, into our bed. So don't try to shift the blame." Her shoulders sagged as the fight drained out of her. "What do you want from me?" "I want you to take responsibility," I said. "I want you to admit that this isn't about me, or the kids, or some excuse about feeling trapped. This is about your choices. Your selfishness." She nodded slowly, her voice barely audible. "You're right. I don't know why I did it. Maybe I was bored, or lonely, or… I don't know." I stood, unable to sit there any longer. "That's your problem to figure out. Not mine." Before she left, I handed her an envelope. "What's this?" she asked. "Details for the divorce proceedings," I said. "My lawyer will be in touch. And just so we're clear, I'm going for custody. Full custody." Her eyes widened in panic. "Jack, you can't." "I can," I interrupted. "And I will. You want to fight me on this? Fine. But you should know that I have everything documented. Every text, every video, every lie you've told. The courts will see it all." She stood there, stunned, as I opened the door. "Goodbye, Emily." After she left, I sat down at the kitchen table, the weight of the confrontation settling over me. I didn't feel triumphant or vindicated. I felt exhausted, like I'd just run a marathon with no finish line in sight. But as I looked around the quiet house, I reminded myself that this was a step forward. It wasn't just about ending my marriage, it was about rebuilding my life. One piece at a time. The days after Emily's visit were a whirlwind of preparation. My lawyer, Jennifer, kept me grounded, urging me to focus on what mattered most, securing stability for the kids. The thought of them being shuffled between homes, caught in the fallout of Emily's selfish choices, fueled my determination. The evidence was solid: Emily's infidelity, her blatant disregard for boundaries, and the recordings of her mocking our family's stability. But family court wasn't just about evidence, it was about perception. I needed to show I was the better choice, not just prove she was the worse one. Emily called once during that time. Her voice was shaky, pleading. "Jack, can we meet again? Please? For the kids? There's nothing left to talk about," I said, keeping my tone firm. "We'll handle this through our lawyers." "But—" "Goodbye, Emily," I said, ending the call before she could continue. Jennifer helped me outline a plan. I gathered everything: bank records showing Emily's unexplained withdrawals, the security footage, and even testimony from a neighbor who'd seen Chris's car parked outside on more than one occasion. "Keep a journal," Jennifer suggested. "Document everything: your schedule with the kids, their routines, how they're adjusting. Courts like to see consistency." I followed her advice to the letter. Every soccer practice, every school drop-off, every bedtime story went into that journal. It wasn't just for the courts. It was a way to remind myself why I was doing this. Emily, predictably, tried to spin the narrative. Through her lawyer, she painted a picture of a woman overwhelmed by family life, unsupported by her husband, and seeking solace in a moment of weakness. "She's going to play the victim," Jennifer warned. "We need to counter that with facts, not emotion." And we did. The recordings spoke for themselves, as did the timestamps and patterns of her absences. The custody hearing was scheduled 3 weeks later. I spent every waking moment preparing, running through possible questions, rehearsing my answers. Jennifer drilled me relentlessly. "Don't lose your temper," she said. "No matter what she says. Stay calm, stay factual, and always bring it back to the kids." The day of the hearing, I arrived early, dressed in a suit that felt too stiff but necessary. Emily was already there, sitting with her lawyer. She looked polished, composed, a stark contrast to the tears and desperation she'd shown before. She gave me a small, strained smile, but I didn't return it. The judge entered, and the proceedings began. Emily's lawyer went first, delivering a carefully crafted narrative about a mother trying her best in the face of a distant husband and mounting pressures. Emily played the part well, her voice cracking at all the right moments, her eyes misting as she spoke about her love for the kids. But when it was our turn, Jennifer dismantled her story piece by piece. "Your Honor," Jennifer said, holding up the folder of evidence, "this is not the story of a mother overwhelmed. This is the story of a woman who made repeated, deliberate choices to undermine the stability of her marriage and, by extension, her children's home life." She presented the security footage, the texts, and even Emily's financial records. Each piece landed like a hammer. When I took the stand, I focused on the kids. Their routines, their needs, and my commitment to ensuring their lives remained as normal as possible. "Do you love your wife?" Emily's lawyer asked, clearly aiming for a reaction. I paused, steadying myself. "I did," I said honestly. "But love doesn't excuse betrayal. And it doesn't change what's best for my kids." After hours of testimony and cross-examinations, the judge called for a recess. The courtroom emptied, leaving me alone with my thoughts. When the judge returned, the ruling was clear. I was awarded primary custody, with Emily granted visitation rights under strict guidelines. Relief washed over me, but it was bittersweet. This wasn't a victory, it was the start of a new reality. Emily approached me after the ruling, her face pale. "Jack, please. I'm begging you. Don't shut me out of their lives." "That's up to you," I said quietly. "Prove you can put them first." She nodded, tears streaming down her face as she walked away. That night, I sat with Ryan and Lily as they played a board game in the living room. Their laughter filled the house, a sound I hadn't realized how much I missed. For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. This wasn't the life I'd planned, but it was a life I could rebuild, for them, and for me. In the weeks following the custody hearing, life began to settle into a new rhythm. The mornings were chaotic as always, Ryan forgetting his homework, Lily refusing to eat her cereal because it looked weird, but I embraced the madness. It was mine now, fully and completely. Emily's visits with the kids were awkward at first. She tried to engage them, to act as if nothing had changed, but Ryan saw through it. He kept his responses short, his eyes guarded. Lily, being younger, was more forgiving, though she clung to me after every visit, asking questions I wasn't always prepared to answer. "Why can't Mommy live here with us anymore?" she asked one evening as I tucked her into bed. I sighed, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Sometimes grown-ups make choices that hurt each other," I said gently. "But what matters is that we both love you very much. That will never change." It wasn't a perfect answer, but it was the best I could give. I focused on making the house a home again, a place of warmth and stability. The first step was dismantling the ghost of the life Emily and I had built together. I boxed up the photos of us as a couple, leaving only the ones of the kids. Her favorite decor, a vase she insisted was art, the throw pillow she'd bought on a whim, went into storage. The garage, once the setting for her betrayal, became my project. I repurposed the space into a workshop, something I'd always wanted but never had time for. It felt cathartic, reclaiming it inch by inch. Work was another anchor. My colleagues knew I'd been through a tough time, but I kept the details vague. Diving into projects and problem-solving gave me a sense of control, a welcome distraction from the emotional weight of everything else. One day, during lunch, a coworker named Lauren, someone I'd known for years but never really spoken to, sat down across from me. "You seem lighter," she said, smiling. "Lighter?" I raised an eyebrow. "Yeah, like a weight's been lifted. It suits you." I chuckled. "Divorce will do that, I guess." She nodded, her expression understanding. "Sometimes losing something makes room for something better." Her words stayed with me long after the conversation ended. Emily, for her part, was trying. She respected the visitation schedule and even offered to attend co-parenting sessions. Part of me wanted to reject the idea outright, but I knew it wasn't about me, it was about the kids. The sessions were tense. Seeing her in such a controlled environment, stripped of her excuses and charm, was both satisfying and heartbreaking. "I just want to make things right," she said during one session, her voice trembling. "It's not about what you want anymore," I replied evenly. "It's about the kids." She nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. Months passed. The pain dulled, replaced by a cautious optimism. I started to focus on myself in ways I hadn't in years, running, cooking new recipes, even reading books that had been collecting dust on the shelf. One evening, as I was helping Ryan with a school project, he paused and looked at me. "You seem happier now, Dad," he said. I froze, the honesty in his voice cutting through me. "I am," I admitted, ruffling his hair. "And I'll always do my best to keep it that way for you and Lily." The kids and I began new traditions: Saturday movie nights, Sunday morning pancake marathons, evening walks around the neighborhood. Slowly but surely, the house filled with laughter again. And one day, as I stood in the garage, admiring the workbench I built from scratch, I realized something. Emily's betrayal had been devastating, yes. But it had also been a turning point. It forced me to see what really mattered, to shed the parts of my life that weren't serving me. I'd been holding on to a version of love that wasn't real. Now I was building something new, something honest, not just for the kids, but for myself. One night, as I stood on the back porch, watching the stars, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but it was mine to walk, and for the first time, I felt ready. It wasn't the ending I'd envisioned. It was better,